And here's a few kickers I looked at off the wire this week. The first kicker, Eddie Pinheiro with the San Francisco 49ers. Pinheiro, it's a few weeks of the season with injury, but now he's back, and he had a nice ball game versus the Titans with 14 fantasy points. So Pinheiro, pretty much all season, it's been double-digit fantasy games season besides two for Eddie Pinheiro. So obviously San Francisco, they're throwing out a lot in the red zone. Pinheiro, another kicker as well, who's got a big boot. And this week, an indoor ball game at the Colts, which is always a plus, especially this time of year. If you got to travel to the East Coast, the weather conditions, obviously I'm going to favor a kicker. So an indoor game with Indianapolis, like I said, on an offense that stalls out a lot, I think that's good for Eddie Pinheiro again this week, and he's putting up a lot of points this season. He's available in 83% of fantasy leagues. Next kicker will Richard at the Minnesota Vikings. So Richard, he had a big ball game at the Dallas Cowboys. He's out there right now in 76% of fantasy leagues, and we know he's got one of the better boots in all the league is Will Richard. So the last few weeks here for him, week 12 at Green Bay 10, week 13 versus Seattle, he didn't get an opportunity, week 14 versus the Commanders 8, and week 15 at the Cowboys, 12 fantasy points. So this week, a great matchup at the New York Giants. Give up the 10th most fantasy points to kickers on the season. I know the weather, it's not great. Could possibly be snow, could be windy, obviously, especially in MetLife Stadium. But Will Richard, it hasn't mattered all season long where he's kicking. For the most part, he's going out there and he's putting up big numbers. So this week in a good matchup versus a Giant defense, I can't stop anyone. He's a good pickup this week. The next kicker, Brandon McManus of the Green Bay Packers. Brandon McManus, he went back versus his former team at the Denver Broncos and had a big game with 16 fantasy points in the tough loss at Denver. So the McManus, he's on a high-powered offense of the Green Bay Packers. Some weeks it's just going to be extra points, and then some weeks we're going to see like we did at Denver. We had many opportunities in that ball game. The last few weeks for McManus, week 12 versus Minnesota 12, week 13 at Detroit 8, week 14 versus the Bears 4, and week 15 at the Broncos 16 fantasy points. So this week another tough weather condition, or at least a tough place to play at Chicago, where Soldier Field in December is a very tough place to play, obviously, where the grass is usually ripped up this time of year. Freezing temperatures out there, heavy winds, and also snow at times. So we'll see what the forecast is as the week goes on. But McManus, he's having a solid season. And like I said, he's in one more high-powered offenses in the league. And he's out there in 84% of fantasy leagues. Next kicker, Harrison Mevis of the Los Angeles Rams. So Rams, they're putting up big numbers this season all year long. And the other thing with Mevis as well, he's only a kicker most times than not, where he's relegated to extra points, even though he's finally coming off a double-digit game, where he's only had 2 double-digit fantasy games in the 6 he's played in the season. So the last few weeks for Mevis, week 12 versus Tampa 13, week 13 at the Panthers 4, and week 14 at the Cardinals 9, and week 15 versus the Lions 12. So week 16 at Seattle, Thursday night game. You know, the weather might not be great there, but Mevis so far, he's looking like a solid kicker, and obviously way better kicker than Joshua Carty was this season for this Ram team, and that's why they went with him. So he's getting his opportunities. He's on a high-powered offense. And then the matchup in Seattle, where they're bend but don't break defense, where we just saw a field goal battle between them and the Indianapolis Colts. I think Mevis could go out there and have a ball game, 10, 12 fantasy points, and he's out there still in tons of fantasy leagues as well in 84%. And the final kicker, Nick Folk of the New York Jets. And Nick Folk, even at 40 years old, Nick Folk's going out there and he's still hitting long ones. And we know this Jet offense is one of the worst offenses in the league, and it stalls out a whole lot. So the last few weeks for Folk, week 13 versus Atlanta 11, week 14 versus Miami 4, and week 15 at the Jags 11 fantasy points. So this week a good matchup indoors at the New Orleans Saints. Give up the 7th most fantasy points to kickers on the season. And like I said, Nick Folk, he's kicking like he's in his mid-20s, where 50-plus yards hasn't been a problem for him. So with that being great, where he has a great boot, and on an offense that can't score touchdowns, it's a great add this week, and he's out there in 98% of fantasy leagues. That's a few kickers I looked at off the wire for week 16 of the fantasy football season.